People are still kind of getting connected in. See everybody. Tony. Jim's got a waterfall we're going to be standing at in a couple of weeks behind him there. Right. So are we up? We're on YouTube.
Yep.
All right. Oh, we still got. Okay, Gary's back in. Al, be
How's
prepared.
the smoke there, Gary?
You. Oh yeah, how's the smoke, Gary? Just
okay.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Better.
He's muted.
Just thumbs up or thumbs down.
Maybe he's not hearing us. Thumbs down.
That's too bad.
Yeah, and we keep, we have too many people to talk at once. So sometimes we'll unmute folks or not. But if you haven't been in these before, we keep it so that just the presenters are unmuted to just let things roll a little bit. But sometimes we can unmute folks. All right. Cool. So today we're going to talk about night sky photography. We're going to talk about some techniques and tips and tricks. And I'm putting the finishing touches on this course that's been long promised, but I keep learning new things and I keep amending it and switching it and changing it. I think it's going to be all the better for that. But it's just about done. And we practice
this week, right?
Skills. Yeah, it's going to be done by the end of this week and up for sale. And we've got a few announcements. Rick's going to jump in with just a couple of things before we start talking about night sky photography.
So about the course, as we said, it's not ready yet. We'd hope to have it ready this morning. But over on the hudsonhenry.com office hours page, hudsonhenry.com/office hours, there's a sign up form. And if you want to go put your email in there when the course is ready, we'll send you a note that it's ready with a 10% off coupon. And if you're pre-registered for the Zoom call already, you don't need to do that. You'll get an email regardless. But a bunch of people just sort of come in on YouTube, and we want to make sure it was available for everyone. So again, that's hudsonhenry.com/office hours, and you can sign up there. I'm sorry.
For those who were in that Brookings workshop where we were really working Milky Way, and you were helping me to figure some of the last bits out too, that we're going to send those folks that course too, as we kind of promised during that workshop, since it was so Milky Way focused. So don't go jumping and buying it if you happen to be in that one. All right.
And then we're off in less than 3 weeks for the National Parks workshops, which we're very excited about. And so our next office hours won't be until October 26th when we're back. And for that one, we're going to do a gallery of submissions. What we'd love to see are your Milky Way night sky blue hour photography. Although, if you want to submit a different image, that's fine too. That gallery should be available starting later this week. So, and I think that's all I've got for announcements.
All right.
So have at it, Hudson Henry.
Have at it. All right, I shall. So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to share my screen and just kind of talk through my history of shooting night photography and how I've kind of gotten to where I've gotten, which is absolutely loving this tracker system, the Move Shoot Move tracker system with the lightweight ball head atop a pan and tilt head. So first off, I'm going to jump in, share my screen, and I've got some images here that just go through, a bit of the history of myself with the Milky Way. And I'll start with some of the latest stuff that I've done, sort of where I've gotten to. Let's see. There we go. This image is really my favorite Milky Way image yet, although some of the stuff that we got down in Brookings competes with it. This is Mount St Helens this summer. Beautiful night. The foreground photographed at the very last stage of blue hour, where there's just enough light on the landscape for a really long, low ISO, noise reduced exposure. You use long exposure noise reduction just to kill any dead pixels, and you can, fire off a low ISO image for minutes on a steady tripod. And then you wait till the Milky Way is out in the dark of night, get well focused, put your camera on a tracker and get a clean shot of the Milky Way. And we were practicing that down on the southern coast of Oregon last week on our workshop. And, we timed it to have some Milky Way visibility. And it's a time of year when it tends to be kind of clear. And we lucked out and we found some really spectacular spots to go out. That kind of clean, relatively noise-free pinpoint stars, along with those blue hour shots of the foreground where you get all the detail that you're after. One of my favorites yet here. But, it has taken literally years. Here's one more. I want to just make the point that it doesn't always have to be the Milky Way either. The blue hour as the stars are first coming out over a beautiful landscape. I mean, those just remind me of so many evenings camping someplace beautiful, far from city lights. You can get the constellations. I was camped on the northwest corner of Olympic National Park on that wild coast up there with my kids on their first backpacking trip a couple weeks ago. And I didn't have all the fancy gear. I didn't have the star tracker. I shot this with a 24-70 f4 lens using a star stacking technique that's also going to be in this Milky Way course. And, the Big Dipper was up over our campsite. The Milky Way was going to come up later in the night, but it was on the wrong side of the forest. And so I thought, let's do a blue hour capture of the constellations and then have fun with the kids in the tent going to sleep. So, I think that constellations are a total another thing to think about in those kind of late in the blue hour, is that blue of the last light coming around the bend is fading to black in the sky. It can also just be really fun to photograph. My history of photographing the night sky kind of dates back to this image, which is a piece of medium format film. The moon was setting in Death Valley. I was laying out a tent beside the car, kind of out near what they call Star Wars Canyon, the Crowley Overlook, years and years ago. This is probably almost 20 years ago. And I just thought, I'll try one of those star swirls like Art Wolf does. And I left a piece of 400 Provia film exposing for 3 hours while I slept in my tent. And that last afterglow of the moon kind of backlit this Joshua tree. And, those kinds of experiments, in the film days, there was only so much you could do. And then I remember I got my first digital camera that was really capable of capturing stars. And this is with the Nikon D700 up again in Olympic National Park, a place called Lunch Lake on a backpacking trip. Blue hour shots, that camera was pretty darn capable. This is a pretty fast exposure. It had great high ISO performance. You zoom in there, pretty pinpoint. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know about the 500 rule back then. The 500 rule being kind of the old rule we used to use for shooting night skies in Milky Way, where if you divide the focal length of your lens for full frame into 500, it gives you how many seconds you can capture the stars without the Earth's rotation causing them to appear to trail, to move, to turn into lines instead of pinpoints. And that rule has become antiquated with our amazing new sensor technology, high megapixel cameras, unbelievable optics. You start noticing, the stars trail much more quickly than that. And there are new rules, the MPF rule. And that's stuff that I'll get into in the course. That's stuff that is involved if you're doing star stacking, capturing images that are way underexposed and blending them to get rid of noise and bring all of the light from those images combined into one image. But I played a lot with the D700 and getting pinpoint stars, and I found it way more rewarding. This is up on Mount Rainier, than doing those trails. I thought, wow, this is really gives me that feeling of being a kid camping, and up here at the enchantments, a late night trying to capture the foreground. Now, this image, when I put it on Instagram, went bonkers, wild, amazing. Everyone loves it. But if you really zoom in, it's so noisy and the stars aren't really pinpoint. They're trailing and the foreground is just really noisy. Brightening it up, it would never look very good printed. Here's Patagonia, same sort of thing. You really zoom in and look, I didn't even have the stars in focus. On Instagram or on Facebook, this image is, but to print it large, the sky is going to look pretty mucky. This is an example where I don't even think the foreground isn't quite sharp and in focus. There's a lot of work done on this to get it looking as good as it is, but there's only so much possible. Then the Milky Way, I started, doing that 500 rule that we talked about. I started figuring out that the best possible exposure is about 3200 ISO, 30 seconds at f2.8. You can convert that into any other exposure you want. If your lens goes to f1.8, that's a stop and a third faster. You can move down to 1600, maybe 1200 ISO and get the same sort of exposure. You just use that exposure triangle, that equivalence, and figure out your exposure, but it should be about the same as 30 seconds, 3200 ISO for 30 seconds. And then some accidental things. This is in Bears Ears, and I was photographing. I wanted a silhouette, and a truck came around the corner and just lit that for a second in the Valley of the Gods. And that caused me to start doing a little bit of playing around with light painting. Here's just an LED beamed on a C-stack in Olympic National Park from a long ways away, trying to get that foreground better exposed. Again, you look at the Milky Way in this, the stars are all trailing. There's so much noise reduction going on that it just doesn't look clear and sharp. And started doing more light painting. Here's an earlier attempt at Mount St Helens in the Milky Way. And doing some light painting. These were two photographers that were actually taking a break while my friend Andy lit this with a lume cube at Delicate Arch, and I shot this with a 50 millimeter because the Milky Way was low. It's a beautiful scene, but the Milky Way is anything but sharp and very noisy. It's always that if you're not using a tracker or star stacking techniques, you're always in this balance point between having a bright enough exposure and having too much noise and having the stars trail. It just gets complicated because you're limited in how much time you can actually capture the stars with our high resolution sensors without them starting to trail. And that causes you to boost the ISO, and then you get really loud noise. It just starts drowning out the stars. Blue hour is a little easier. This was a fun night. You remember this night, Rick?
I do, yes.
Yeah. This was one of the nicest nights I have ever had at Delicate Arch. Our workshop went up there, and I swear it was like 65 degrees after the sunset and not a breath of wind, in the Milky Way right behind the arch. That was just a beautiful night.
And we lit we lit the arch with a lume cube from quite a distance away.
A couple football fields away.
Yeah. That was it was pretty impressive.
Yeah. And everyone there was just loving it. It was lit just right to be blended with the Milky Way. And, I've done some stuff with product photography, blending the Milky Way and off-road truck company in the outboard desert. I've done some stuff for outdoor research. This is one of my mistakes that I like to highlight. This one, I went up to do the Milky Way from the crater rim of Mount St. Helens. And I was going on a ski trip with friends, and I said, I'll head up the night before and I'll meet you guys up top. I'm going to camp up there. And so I went in the evening before everyone was climbing the mountain, climbed up to the rim, dug a hole, put OR's new bivvy that they gave me in this snow camped hole. And literally, I waited for the Milky Way to come out, and I didn't realize that we had tremendous wildfires in Siberia that year. And the way the jet stream had brought the smoke, put it into the ionosphere up above the Pacific Northwest. And so Portland and Seattle's city lights were just lighting that smoke that was way, way up in the atmosphere and creating this shield that just completely blocked me from doing much star photography. There are all these atmospheric things that can happen. And that's just not your normal light pollution from the city. That's just intense. But, turned it into kind of a fun photo anyway. And here's another one, a couple of things wrong with this particular image. This was on a workshop in Death Valley. And I thought, this is before I was shooting with the Nikon Z system. I was shooting with the old F-mount system. And I thought, wow, I've got the 20 millimeter 1.8. That would be a fabulous lens to do Milky Way. We had something like 15 minutes to capture the Milky Way between dawn and when it rose, because it was late winter, early spring. And it's, horizontal through the sky. And I had no idea that at 1.8, this lens has such horrific coma. I mean, the stars on the edges are little birds. That's when people talk about coma. That's what it is. It's this weird chromatic aberration in bright points in your image. So, lens performance does have something to do with this too. You need a lens that doesn't have much terrible chromatic aberration and coma. And then the other thing is we lit the foreground, and I was kind of helping everybody get their cameras ready, and I never focused on the foreground. I should have taken an image focused on the foreground after capturing the Milky Way. So my foreground is just really blurry when you zoom in. It was cool with the patterns in the sand, but it's that problem with focusing. Here's one that alleviates that. This is focus stack. This is kind of my first foray into focus stacking the Milky Way in the Alvord Desert. At Blue Hour, I shot the cracked sand landscape. And then late when the Milky Way came out, I focused out at infinity and got those mountains back there and just blended it at the mountains. It was really easy to do in Photoshop. That made me start thinking about things differently. And then I got the star tracker. And the star tracker enables you to do things like 240-second exposure and keep all the stars pinpoint because your camera is moving to counterbalance the Earth's rotation. This is my first work out with the move, shoot, move along the John Day River with Rick one night testing last winter. And it was just a revelation. It's like, oh my gosh, that's how you do it. And we started getting much better Milky Ways. And then I went out with Charlie Johnson, who's here in the meeting, to Brookings, and we went down and at kind of a lower tide here at Secret Beach, we climbed up and put a lume cube behind this rock and lit this sea stack and photographed the Milky Way with everything kind of lit a bit in the foreground, and used the move, shoot, move for one shot, capturing the stars nice and pinpoint, and captured the foreground in a completely different shot. And then we realized, wow, it's really hard to blend these two. If you have a blurred foreground that's as complicated as this, and you have a sharp foreground that's as complicated as this, and a Milky Way shot all, in two separate frames, and you want to blend the sky into that, having that blurred foreground in your Milky Way shot makes it literally almost impossible. It's so difficult. So then, I figured out, okay, you need to shoot your foreground and then move to a location where you have a much clearer view of the Milky Way. That same place, same night, same planetary alignment, same angle of the Milky Way, you're still getting the scene that you had. You're just photographing the foreground and then moving to have the least amount of stuff in front of the Milky Way and capture a shot that's a portrait of the Milky Way. And that's where it came to this shoot, going out early this spring when the Milky Way first started rising, using the move, shoot, move to shoot the Milky Way actually at 14 millimeters. So I'd have the entire Milky Way going into space. And then shooting Mount St Helens at Blue Hour beforehand with a 20 millimeter just to bring it closer, and shooting the foreground focused with one frame at f2.8, 20 millimeters, the new Z 2.20 millimeters that doesn't have coma. That wouldn't matter because it's just for the foreground. And then shooting one focused on the mountain and blending those two. And I prefer Helicon focus, but you could do it in Photoshop. You could do it in On1 with focus stacking software. It's just going to take the sharpest parts of the image and blend them. So your foreground's captured, and then you just capture the Milky Way with as little distraction as possible, tilt up in this particular case, and blend the two, either in Photoshop or On1 Photo Raw's layers app. Here's the one from the coast with my little kids. Now, whether you're doing star stacking software using the Mac software, the best one for the Mac is Starry Landscape Stacker, or Starry Star Stacker, Starry Landscape Stacker.
Yep. The
best one for the PC is Sequitur, which is actually free. They're kind of designed where you can paint a mask in that software. It's not the best masking tool, but you can paint a mask over your foreground so that it doesn't consider the foreground when it's blending the stars. But it actually aligns, it rotates the image to keep all the stars aligned and blends the luminance data from all that and looks for what's changing and what isn't changing, and eliminates noise and dead pixels and airplanes and satellites, and really gives you a nice, clear version of the stars. I would prefer, and I find it simpler, to just shoot the foreground the same way we were talking about. You shoot the foreground at Blue Hour, the last light, you get all that that beauty of the foreground. You can dim it down in your software without creating any noise. And then you do your star stacked version of the stars. You don't even need to worry about masking. You're going to have kind of a blurry, messy foreground, but you can very easily just blend in the sharp foreground image. Here's one from the workshop at Natural Bridges down in the Brookings workshop. This one at Whale's Head, which was a wonderful place to shoot the Milky Way. This one at Secret Beach. So that's kind of how I've gotten to where I've gotten. And then I've been building this Milky Way course to sort of share the techniques to get these images that we can print, that we can zoom into 100%, that we can be proud of, whether they're on Instagram or large on our living room wall. And we're also creating some sort of cheat sheets that you can download to your tablet or your phone or print and laminate and take out with you in the field that are sort of a checklist, because it is a complicated process. You know, it was fun, this workshop that we just did in Brookings, because we did it multiple nights and we were able to set everything up, set up our move systems in the house that we had for the workshop in Brookings, kind of work through that, then go out one night where everybody's got their red lights on, and red lights are in everybody's shop, but we're figuring out how to assemble things in the dark. And then the third night, it's like, okay, everybody, we got to do this blindfolded. We're going to do it with as little red light as possible. We're not going to be bothering each other with red lights and getting red lights into the scene. And we got some beautiful stuff. So the course will cover how to assemble everything, how to capture it, and then what to do with the images that you've got, how to bring those in, process them, and develop and composite them.
Rob Hogarth had a question about that, the shot of Secret Beach with you and Charlie. Mm-hmm. And he asks, couldn't you just use a transform tool to make the foreground a little bit bigger so it covered the blurred background?
I mean, you can, but the problem with that particular one is that the way that the rocks, I mean, it's just really complicated with the way that the rocks curve in and out, and they're above, below the trees. It just was a nightmare.
Yeah.
It literally was much more complicated. And to me, the answer is really simple. You know, if you're capturing your foreground, you do that at blue hour, and you don't need to be on the tracker and all that stuff. You can be rock solid on your regular tripod support. You get your sunset shot all lined out. You capture what you wanted to capture at sunset. Maybe your HDR, maybe it's a sun star, maybe it's, you know, whatever, long exposure of waves and beautiful light playing through rocks. Then you've been scouting through the day. What's your Milky Way shot going to be? You use PhotoPill's night AR, augmented reality, and figure out exactly where the Milky Way is going to be, and figure out what you want for your foreground. Get set up there as soon as the magic's over from sunset. Wait for that last bit of blue hour. Start taking shots. Keep your camera at its optimal ISO. There's a whole part of this course about what is your camera's optimal ISO, and it might not be base. It's really interesting. A lot of the most modern cameras, particularly those with Sony sensors, whether they be Nikons or Sonys, have dual channel ISO, where it goes to a new lower ISO level somewhere at 400, 800. Even for the A7S models, it could be up at 16 or 3200. Where suddenly they kick down to a much cleaner noise-free image. You actually wind up with a cleaner, more noise-free image at 400 ISO with the Z7 II than you do at 250 ISO or 200 ISO. It's really weird. So I give you the tools to go out and figure out. There are some websites where you can plug in your camera and look at a chart of noise versus ISO and dynamic range versus ISO and make your decisions. But, you know, essentially, it makes a lot of sense. Capture that foreground image at as high a quality as you can. You know, you're not worried about stars trailing. You're not worried about the earth movement. Everything's moving together. Your foreground staying in one place. You just want to be rooted, rock solid, weight in your stone bag. Capture that foreground scene, and then, you know, have a cup of tea, sit back, wait for the Milky Way to come out, move to a place where you have the most unobstructed view of it possible. Fill the frame except for the very bottom edge with your stars or Milky Way, and do your move, shoot, move capture, or do your star stacking capture. And then you've got a really easy thing to composite in behind your foreground. It's just dead simple.
I think one of the things that we learned on the workshop, just watching people do this, is focusing. You know, getting that first shot at blue hour is fine, but you know, there were definitely issues some people had with focusing on the Milky Way, and there's some tricks. You know, that's one of the things you can do, sort of the tail end of blue hour. When you get set up in your scene, is focus on a distant star that is actually fairly bright at that point in time.
Or the gradient between the mountain ridge or the horizon and the sky, where there's a bright contrast line. You know, that's what autofocus is always working on, is contrast lines. You can also zoom into 100% and focus that line beautifully at the end of blue hour. And if you're working with a DSLR with a traditional lens that's mechanical, I would suggest that you take some gaff tape along with you and tape it so that you can't possibly move that focus. Once your foreground is shot, tape your focus locked, because you're not going to be able to see the stars very well through the viewfinder of a DSLR at night. And you're not going to be able to autofocus a DSLR at night. With the latest mirrorless cameras, you can see planets right up in your viewfinder. You can zoom into 100% and focus them till they're the smallest point of light that you see through your viewfinder. Or with all my Nikon Z cameras and Rick's Sonys, you can go into low light autofocus mode, make sure that's activated in your menus under your autofocus settings, and go into your pinpoint single servo, locked landscape style autofocus, and just, it'll focus a planet. I was actually having a lot of success. This is another thing that we talk about in the course and in the checklist. You're going to set your camera up on the move, shoot, move, and you really can't see your composition. You can't see quite where the Milky Way is in the frame. You kind of point it, get it kind of figured out, activate the level on the back viewfinder of your camera so that you keep it level, and guesstimate what you think your composition should be. Now is when you ramp it up to like 6400 ISO for 15 seconds at, wide open, and you shoot. And you look at it and you say, oh, well, the Milky Way is way too far off to the left. I have way too much horizon in the frame. You tilt up and you turn off noise reduction. These are quick 15-second shots. You're just getting your composition. You're not even worried about focus. You're not worried about exposure settings. You're just ranging in on what is my frame. You do those with quick, really horrible quality, high ISO images. You nail that in. Then once you're locked and set, you keep it so it's level. That's important. You can actually, this is the thing I really got on this workshop. You can actually pull your camera off, point it up at the brightest planet, put your pinpoint autofocus system on it, and autofocus that thing handheld, and then just turn off your autofocus, drop it back on, boom, you're ready to shoot. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. The new cameras really will autofocus a planet, and there's usually a planet out there. Now, you might also have a radio tower on a distant hilltop that'll work for you, or a barn light across the valley. There's some bright little point of light. Your newest mirrorless camera will autofocus on that, and you can see it through your viewfinder if you have a fast enough lens. It might be trickier with an f4 lens than it is with an f2.8 lens. It's dead simple with an f1.8 lens. Yeah. The more light that lens lets in, the more you see in the viewfinder. And then once you've got that all set up, you turn back on your long exposure noise reduction. You set your thing to say 240 seconds at f2.8 at 400 ISO. That's the equivalent of 3200 for 30 seconds at f2.8. So, you have to kind of figure that calculation out. It'll give you a pretty decent histogram that's reaching across the middle of the histogram. You don't want it to be bright. It's not a daylight shot, but you don't want just a spike on the far left. The checklist goes through all that kind of stuff. Turn down your LCD's brightness, turn down your viewfinder's brightness. You're not wanting to burn your night vision out and look at something that's way amplified when you're working with night scenes. Red light only, that way you don't blow your night vision. The more you know your gear, the better you're going to be at this. So the first couple times you're going to be, cursing at your camera and your star tracker and all these little bits and pieces. We're going to have situations where, certain people who should remain nameless are doing a 5-minute exposure with 5-minute long exposure noise reduction. And then they look at it and they're like, I left the lens cap on.
Yeah.
It happens. It happens. Yeah. And what happens is that's really,
hey, Charlie.
Yeah. All right. Charlie's going to fess up to it. What happens is that, if you set your composition so that it's level when you start, then what happens is the star tracker is just rotating under your ball head, just really slow, almost imperceptibly. But over 4 minutes, it goes a little bit out of level. And, you turn off your star tracker to save its battery. Its battery lasts a long time, but you turn it off, and it can also power via USB-C. So you bring a battery bank along, but you turn it off. And when it comes time to take the next shot, all you have to do is loosen the pan at the base of your ball head and rotate it back to where your level on the back of your camera shows green. You're right back where you started, because all it was doing was rotating on the same exact axis as the pan mechanism on your ball head.
So we've been talking the last few months, even when we brought up night sky photography, Milky Way photography, we've been talking about the move, shoot, move and what a great device it is. But it's, it's still a $200 item, and, people might not want to be, you might want to spend that money on it.
That's true.
What can you give a sort of short pros and cons or on the whole star stacking versus the star tracker.
Right.
Because we had a bunch of people in the Brookings workshop who did the star stacking method. And most of them had pretty good success after. It was a similar sort of process, a couple of days of practicing getting set up, practicing your composition, all that sort of stuff. But the last night, I think everybody got some good stacked shots. But there are a couple of drawbacks with it when you're out in the field.
There are. Well, I mean, the pros and cons, I would say that the pros and cons are that, you're not carrying an extra 3+ pounds. My setup right here with the Acrotech GXP, this is a 1 pound ball head that holds 50 pounds. It's a wonderful ball head. It's not cheap. I think it's the greatest of a ball heads. I'm not a big ball head fan, but for this purpose, you want the ability to just be able to line it up however you want while you can't level the base. So a ball head's the thing to use for this. So you're carrying an extra ball head, you're carrying a 2 pound device. I think that trackers, aside from the move, shoot, move, are incredibly complicated to get the polar alignment right when you're looking through a little polar alignment scope, particularly in the middle of the night. They take a lot more care and time to set up. This, once you get the feel for just using this little laser and beaming it up at the North Star, is really pretty dead simple. You can move positions, realign, check alignment constantly. It's just, that's what I love about it, is its size, weight, and ease of use. But there are times where you don't want to spend $200 or you don't want to carry 3 extra pounds in the bag. And the star tracker the star stacking technique will work. As I showed in that Olympic National Park shot, all I had was my 24-70 f4 and a long lens on that trip with my family. And the stars were so beautiful. I thought, well, I'll try stacking with the f4, and it worked great. It's trickier in certain ways because you have to kind of trust the software is going to work for you. And you have to do a little bit of mathematics to figure out how many shots to take. I mean, you can choose you'll see when you see the course and my little checklist, there's kind of a formula for how many shots do I need to take stacked to get that equivalent exposure, 30 seconds, 3200 ISO, f2.8. It's different because you're aggregating the time of each shot, and you have to go in and figure out, what is the maximum length I can shoot each shot where I keep the stars pinpoint. That's the thing that you can use photo pills. You plug in your camera and your focal length, and it'll tell you. But you also don't really see what the shot's going to look like in camera. You're still going to do the thing I just talked about, where you bump up your ISO and you take a fast test shot and you have a look to make sure that you've got your composition the way that you want it. Then you lock everything down and you go into the settings for the star stacking. You need to use an intervalometer. You're not going to do long exposure noise reduction, but you're going to maybe take 20 pictures. You're going to take a dark slide beforehand. So you put the lens cap on the camera, take an exposure identical to all the others that are going to happen, then activate your intervalometer and have it take like 20 frames that are maybe 6 to 9 seconds long. And then you're going to take another dark frame with the lens cap on the camera. And they're all going to look really dark. That was one thing that students in the workshop struggled with. They're like, well, this doesn't look like a Milky Way shot. Well, no, it's a really underexposed image. What you're trying to do is shoot it at an ISO level that your camera doesn't create horrible noise. It's going to do some noise reduction in the star stacking software. That's pretty amazing. So you can shoot a little higher than you might want to normally shoot. Say with my Z7 II, I was fine with 1600, maybe 3200 ISO. 1600s makes me happier though. And you're going to be shooting, a maximum with my 24-70. I think it was like 6 seconds, something like that. So I wind up taking 26-second frames. And each one of those is going to look so horrifically underexposed, because if you think about the real exposure should be f2.8, 30 seconds, 3200 ISO. I'm shooting at 1600 ISO for 6 seconds at f4. They look almost black with a few points of light, but the software is going to aggregate all that light into a single image while it does noise reduction. And it's going to take those dark slides that you took before and after and do long exposure noise reduction. You don't do long exposure noise reduction doing stacking. You turn that off. You set your intervalometer to take a frame, say you're doing a 6-second exposure, you set your intervalometer to take a frame every 7 seconds for 20 frames and just hit the button and walk away. So it's more complicated. And then it's also more complicated when you get back to process it. You got these 22 images sitting there and you need to, bring those all through the star stacking software, process them, bring them back in. It's just, I love seeing what I'm getting right away in the field with the star tracker, and then have it ready to go. Just process it a little bit, blend it in with the foreground. Boom, done.
Yeah.
I think if you have the capacity to carry that extra 3 pounds and you have the $200 that isn't, going to make or break it, it's a really great thing to invest in.
Okay. Do you want to talk a little bit about lenses and filters and things like that?
Yeah. Again, I think the biggest thing if you're using a star tracker is not having much chromatic aberration, not having coma in the corners of your lens. You saw that image that I had from the old Nikon 20mm 1.8, the F-mount version, which is a nice, small, lightweight lens that throws an intensely beautiful sun star. It's my favorite Nikon lens of all time for creating sun stars when you obscure all but a little bit of the sun and stop it down to f22. It's just a wonderful lens for that. For shooting the Milky Way, not so much. You have to stop it down to like f4, f5.6 to get rid of that coma where all the bright stars in the corner look like little birds with wings. Yeah. It's just a weird piece of chromatic aberration. Now, the new Nikon 20mm 1.8 is much bigger, heavier, more expensive, but it has zero coma. It is one of the best Milky Way lenses that I've used to date. It and the 14 to 24 that I have on the camera right now. I find that the neutral night filters, the latest ones that are out, are pretty spectacular. Even if you don't have that much light pollution going on, they add a little bit of a blue cast, which, you're shooting raw anyway. It's easy to warm it up a little bit if it's too blue to your taste. That's all kind of a choice in white balance anyway. I like to set my camera for about 3,800 Kelvin when I'm doing this Milky Way stuff. Auto white balance tends to make them orange and it doesn't look great on the back of your camera. I like to blue it up a little bit while I'm out in the field just so it's looking nice on my camera. And then these neutral night filters, I've got my pack of 112s right here. They, let's see, it's right here. Yeah, one of these just, I've got them out of order still from the workshop. You just drop it on, with the 14 to 24, you can just put it on this hood that snaps right on the front of the lens, magnetic, click. And I find that it creates a little more separation between the galactic core, that kind of gas cloud of the galactic core, and the background. It just makes it a little bit more defined. And if there is light pollution from, say, barns or small town street lights that haven't switched over to LED, they tend to be sodium vapor, and these neutral night filters cut out sodium vapor. And to my mind, that's what you're still most likely to encounter out in a nice night sky working environment, even in a lot of cities. It can just be a nice filter to cut through some of that night noise pollution, that light pollution that we get.
I did a star stack in Brookings with the filter and without the filter, and there's a marked difference in the quality of the image with the night filter. I'll also add for my 4 Sony friends in the audience. I bought the new 14mm 1.8 GM lens and the 20 1.8 G lens, which is a great deal, and use both of those, and I'm kind of blown away by the quality of those lenses. They have the 14 especially has no cone at all. It's just an amazing lens. So
it is, and the thing that blows me away about that Sony lens is how small and light it is.
It is.
It's a 14 1.8 that is small and light. The only problem is it doesn't have a easy to use filter system like the Nikon.
Well, I've got a little rear filter set for it, so
it'll work.
It'll work. So, all right. And actually, one more thing on the stacking. we had a question asking if you could just use on one's focus stacking or Photoshop's focus stacking to do the night sky stuff, and you can't, because the star stacking software is really designed its sole purpose is to stack star shots, and it takes into account the movement.
Right. And how much was Starry Landscape Stacker on the App Store? It was like $40 or something, right?
$40, yeah.
Yeah. And Secretor is free for the PC users. So their suggested donation, I think giving them some coffee money. Once you use it, you'll feel like you should give them some coffee money because it's really cool.
And the other thing about the Move Shoot Move is it doesn't just work in the northern hemisphere; it works in the southern hemisphere as well. Yes. There's just no North Star to focus on. You focus on what the southern is. It called Southern Cross?
There's a specific place to go in the Southern Cross. Now, and we haven't found a really simple app for the iPhone yet to help figure out exactly where to align polar alignment. You'll see in this course that I talk about the fact, and I mainly do it for the people who are just total nitpickers. I'll wind up with, if I don't say this, there's going to be 100 emails and comments from people saying, well, it's not exactly on the North Star. For our purposes, doing this kind of work with wide angle lenses, you can point the laser of the Move Shoot Move right up at the exact North Star, and it will be fine. It will be fine for 5-minute exposure at 14 millimeters or 20 millimeters. If you're doing longer lens work, even if you go to maybe 50 millimeters, the way that the constellations align, the leading edge of the Big Dipper points to the North Star, and then Cassiopeia is down here. And if you move off the North Star in the northern hemisphere where we are, just a couple laser widths down towards below Cassiopeia, there's an app that shows you right where that line would go. And it's just a couple laser widths away if you want to be perfectly accurate. So I do have to give that disclaimer. And I do label a couple apps that you can have for both Android and iPhone. The Android one is pretty simple. The iPhone one, the only one I've found, looks like it's a NASA control platform for the Mars launch. It's really complicated. And there's a couple settings in there. I show you, there's a model that you need to use. I can't remember the name of it, but it's in the course, that has a simpler view of polar alignment. And it works in the southern hemisphere or the northern hemisphere.
So with regard to, he went away. Oh my goodness. Hand puppets. Is he back?
Somebody put up the color bars quick. Never seen that before.
He says he's there. So there was one question about the filters for the 14 and also for the 12 to 24. Basically, you can get these sort of clip-in filters that just sort of fit right in the back. You undo a couple screws, take out the plastic thing that Sony provides, and then somewhere around here, I've got a little box of filters, and you just sort of clip it into the back of the lens. So
checklist in order of operations.
What happened to you?
Checklist in order of operations. Plug the USB-C cable into camera instead of running off the battery during office hours. So the battery died. Anywho, so sorry about that. Hey, we do have to get to that question that involves Al, because we told him he's going to be on, and we gotta spotlight him.
Okay, so we had one. Tom Storer said he was going to be in the Outer Banks and he's going to try and put a lighthouse with the Milky Way in the image. And any suggestions you have would be appreciated. And Al, you sent us that very shot almost.
Yes, I did.
A few weeks ago.
It was beautiful.
And let me pull it up.
You can share your screen. I have it. Okay. You can share your screen now.
Okay, how do I do that? Let's see.
Bottom middle, green.
Share screen. There we go. There we go.
Is
Can you see
very
it?
cool.
Yep.
Yeah, this was a single shot at 15 seconds because of the complications of the interaction of the light coming off the lighthouse plus the Milky Way. So I was trying to use the move, shoot, move, and then stacking and all that. And I just figured out I'm just going to do a 15-second shot and see what happens. And it turned out pretty good.
It's awesome. That's a really, if you have those light rays coming out, it's going to be a really complicated masking job.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, and the light goes all the way down almost to the building,
Yeah.
to the chimney on the building. You'd see a light ray or a shadow coming down almost to the top of the chimney.
I think
So
it's just fine that way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what
I
thought.
think if you're shooting an image like this with a working lighthouse, you're going to have more issues trying to use stacking or tracking. You're just yeah.
I think in this case, this is where knowing your camera's highest performance ISO and using the combination of kind of fudging the rules. Maybe you go a little less than perfect pinpoint accurate stars for exposure time so that you get a little bit less noise, and you're going to just be okay with, you're going to have to kind of balance those factors. Every single one of these night sky images is a challenge in its own right, both at the point of capture and at the point of editing. But the biggest thing is knowing your equipment and its limitations and advantages, and also how you're going to process it after the fact. The more you start doing these things, the more, the processing informs the capture informs the processing, and you just improve as you go along. Super cool.
Dare I
image.
say it?
Yeah.
Part of it is practice.
Part of it is practice. Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
This
you've
one-
spent the last 10 months working to hone this whole thing down. So I'm sorry, Al.
I was going to say this is at 1600 ISO as well. So
Yeah, nice. So Al, if you just hit the stop sharing up at the top, there's a little red. There you go.
Charlie had a question. You talked about it a little bit in that Olympic shot, but Milky Way is sort of one of the holy grails. But you can get these beautiful shots of the night sky. But one of the issues that you run into is if you try and shoot them at the same time you would normally shoot the Milky Way, there's a zillion stars in the sky. It's hard to pull out, constellations and stuff like that. For if you're working with the move, shoot, move, one of the issues that we had was trying to reset up, an hour or so after blue hour ended, and there's so many stars in the skies that the North Star tends to look a bit. It's hard to pick it out.
Oh, you mean with the other star trackers?
Yeah. Oh no, with the move, shoot, move, we had people who, when there were so many stars out there on that beach that night, it was hard to really pick out the North Star.
I think that I think the more you do it, the more you'll be able to pick out the North Star, because it is the brightest one. I mean, you can still pick out the Big Dipper as a set of bright stars, even without any noise pollution. And the leading edge of the Big Dipper points right at the next bright star on a line from that is Polaris. And, the more you do it, the more you'll know where it should be. The other thing is you can make sure it's right. With the move, shoot, move, it's always a laser beam. So you point that laser beam up at it, and then you're doing other things, and you click. 10 minutes later, if it wasn't the North Star, it's going to be drifting. You got to find the one that you stay on. It doesn't move.
We're off topic on this. So, but the idea of shooting stars is better in that sort of blue hour, late blue hour period. Is that correct?
I think so. I think it makes a much more pleasing image, and it lets you make portraits of the constellations where the other stars don't drown them out.
Yeah.
I do. And if you are using another tracker, I have an Ioptron Sky Watcher Pro, which is a wonderful star tracker, much bigger. You can use long lenses, do deep space stuff if you want. It has a polar alignment system that goes right up the middle of it. That's, dead accurate. You're looking through these illuminated reticle with red lines. It's like setting up a telescope. The problem is you can't find the North Star in that because you're looking at such a limited field of space, and there's all these bright stars on a good night. And so that's one that if you're going to use that machine, you get locked down and set up in a ridiculously stable spot, make sure all your legs are tight, get stone bag full level, set that tracker up when the constellations are first poking out and the North Star is the only thing you can see in that part of the sky. And you line it up and get dead set on it and then don't move during the night. That's the thing. I think they call the move, shoot, move because it's also capable of doing time lapse. It has a little turntable and it can fire your camera and move, fire your camera and move. But I think it's a move, shoot, move because you can set up on the Milky Way, shoot it. Oh, I'd rather move to another location. And with this little laser, it takes you like 30 seconds to realign on the North Star. It's just so much simpler. I think you can move, shoot the Milky Way, move, shoot the Milky Way, move, shoot the Milky Way again during the night. It's something you can't do with the other trackers. And I wish that they would have some of the bigger trackers that can handle a heavier payload that had a hybrid system with a laser and then a polar alignment.
Yeah. Sorry, but the question still is out there. So what type of settings are you looking for these late blue hour shots with the constellations?
With regard to you mean with regard to camera settings?
Yeah.
You're looking for a histogram that has data into the right side of it. You're going to have at the blue hour, it's going to be a big wave of blue. You look at your red, green, and blue histogram, you don't want to blow the blue channel all the way out. You're going to have kind of a wave of blue leading the red and green because that's the light that's in the sky is that blue hour light. And you want that to cross over maybe 3/4 of the way across your histogram. You don't want everything bunched up to the left and you don't want bright daylight. And you want to be at a low enough ISO that you're not getting a ton of noise in there. It's the same sort of thing, but it's going to change as blue hour changes, right? Yeah. One night's going to be one night way when there's an explosive sunset that's fading and you still have that orange glow on the horizon. We kind of had that in Olympic National Park. Another night, it's going to be, just a severe clear day fading into blue hour. It happens more quickly. As it changes, it starts to go fading to black. It happens fast. And you're going to go from a bright kind of bird's egg blue in the sky to a deep blue to midnight blue to almost kind of violet to black. And as that's happening, exposure is changing fast and you just have to chase it and keep looking at your Instagram.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest mistake I've made when doing these types of shots is you get yourself set up and you think you got 5 minutes or 7 minutes with that exposure and you don't. You need to look at your histogram after every shot and adjust as the light changes. So you get beautiful shots that way, but so a couple people ask questions. You see these images on Instagram and from other photographers and other places where the Milky Way sort of does that arc.
Yep.
How do you find that arc
where it's like an arch over the landscape?
Yeah. So it's like someone wants to get the Milky Way in sort of that arch, on the horizon. What techniques would you? I mean, this is more of a searching thing, right? To use photo pills. It happens more in the northern hemisphere in the winter, in the closer to the middle latitudes, where you start getting further to the south. So if you get far enough to the south in winter, the Milky Way is visible, but it's like a line coming across the horizon. So it's a time of year thing. Some people are doing panoramas, and I've had a lot of people asking me about panoramas with a star tracker, and I would say just don't even try. Just you can do star stacking with your normal panoramic setup. With the tracker, things are taking too long, and also just trying to get level to pan while you're on this really complicated contraption. I've tried a couple things. Move Shoot Move offers this wedge plate thing, and they sent me one to test, and I told them I couldn't recommend it because this thing's really pretty rock solid and stable. If I throw that wedge thing under the ball head between the Move Shoot Move in it, and the whole thing becomes like a springboard. It's like a diving board, just the slightest wind and the whole thing's kind of bouncing. It just loses its stability. So I think going ultra wide, and you're maybe going to set the camera landscape orientation versus portrait, and just at 14 millimeters on the right winter night, low enough down towards
like in Florida, Al and I would have had that happening this winter when I went and visited my kids' grandparents, my wife's parents down in Florida. I met up with Al and we were going to photograph the Milky Way, but there was just this sea haze that kept us from getting it. We instead sat in some lawn chairs, shot the breeze and drank a few beers and watched the night. But we would have had that kind of Milky Way over this pier in Flagler Beach, but it wasn't to be. So up here, as far north as we are in Oregon, it's pretty tricky to get that. If you get further down towards the southern states and below, moving towards the equator in the wintertime, the Milky Way will do that for you. You can see it. You know, if you use photo pills AR, you can set different dates in your location and go out and preview what's the Milky Way going to be like on December, 25th. What's it going to do Christmas night this year? What's it going to be like in January? What's going to be like in February? From where I'm standing, where is it going to be in the landscape? And you can drag your finger along and change how it moves through the hours, know what time to be where, and then just hope the weather cooperates.
All right. So we've only got a couple minutes left. And we had one question that I think is kind of interesting. You've been talking about noise reduction software, No Noise, DxO Pure Raw, and the Topaz one. Do any of these work well with reducing noise in some of these Milky Way situations?
So in the course, I'm going to use DxO Pure Raw. I use DxO Pure Raw, which really is overall my favorite of these apps, and it's my mantra with regard to these. You're not working with your original raw file once you use any one of those three pieces of software that we talked about. You're creating a new file that's been through their processing engine, demosaicked, denoised, lens corrections sometimes applied. I think DxO has a lighter touch. It takes a 1600 ISO image and makes it look more like it was a 250 or 400 ISO image. It lets me do the kind of finishing touches myself and doesn't tend to add any artifacts. I think that both Topaz and DxO really mess up Milky Way shots, black space shots. They pick up some kind of weird patterning that's in the blank spot of the stars, and they create what looks like really weird pattern noise in between the stars. And there's no way to get rid of it once you run them through those. On one, the No Noise does a decent job with Milky Way shots. If you got a noisy Milky Way shot, you have to move that detail slider control back and forth, zoom into 100% and look all over your image and make sure you're not adding weird artifacts, but you can get it to where it isn't. I can't find a way to do it in either of the others. But on my foregrounds, I like to use Pure Raw. So those
and I'll
foreground
just
shots during blue hour.
I'll just add that I do the On1 user guide as a contractor for On1, and I'm doing the one for 2022, which will have No Noise integrated in it, which reduces one of the issues that Hudson brings up, and I agree with, which is the moment you run a raw file through any one of these three standalone apps, you've basically done most of your initial raw processing in those apps. But if you're an On1, if you're a photo raw user, because No Noise is integrated into it, you don't have that issue. And it's much easier to do things like paint out the No Noise in a separate layer on your foreground. So I think for photo raw users working on Milky Way shots, it's a pretty sweet workflow tool. So,
and I would advise all of you, when we're sort of talking about input noise reduction. Back in the day, there's a lot of things that are automated for us with noise reduction now and sharpening. Back in the day, when we were working with Photoshop, before Lightroom even came out, we had a kind of complicated two-step dance that we did where you bring an image in and you sharpen it and do noise reduction right at intake to get it looking good on screen. And then there was some other things that you had to do when you were output sharpening for either the web or print. And then some people came up with automated software for output sharpening where you said it's going to be for print and it's going to be on glossy paper or matte paper, or it's going to be for the web. Now you see that stuff's built into On1 or built into Capture One or built into Lightroom. When you're going to output an export file, you can tell it what kind of sharpening you want done. what we're talking about here is really input sharpening. And I really truly believe that it's at that stage where you pull your exposure sliders. That's when you want to do the sharp. You can adjust your white point, black point, shadows, highlights, white balance, noise reduction, sharpening. And I don't think you want to go through and do all the work, finish editing and masking and doing a whole bunch of processing to your image when you haven't done the noise reduction yet. And I will just say, I don't do noise reduction on 95% of the images that I take, because they're not something I'm eventually going to print, or they're not images that have problems with noise, and you're never going to notice it sending it in an email or putting it on a website. When you're going to print something large, that's where you gain from doing noise reduction and sharpening precisely. And so, these apps that we're talking about, there's no way I would run all my images through them. It's only for problem images. And for me, doing this technique with the move, shoot, move, and keeping my ISO down and getting my exposure right, or doing star stacking, the foreground can really benefit some. I'm looking for detail there and I'm looking to reduce noise on really long exposures where the shadows are maybe a little bit dark. And those apps can be really helpful. For the stars, they're little points of white light. It isn't so critical. As long as you capture them without too much noise, you should just be able to use the sliders in your app of choice at the raw processing stage to get the noise where you like it. Again, if I was going to use any one of those three on a star image, one by far is the one. The other two, I couldn't get an image out of them that I liked. So.
All right. Well, we've wasted another hour, another week. So remember, the next office hours, October 26th, we'll do a gallery. Give us your night sky, blue hour shots. You can give us something else if you'd like, but we'd love to see some of the work that you're doing. And then if you're interested in the night sky course, don't forget to run over to hudsonhenry.com/office hours and enter in your email. When the course is available, we'll send you an email with a 10% off coupon. And if you pre-registered for Zoom today, you don't need to do that. So Other than that, we'll be off on a workshop tour very soon.
And we'll be seeing some of you on that workshop tour.
Seeing a bunch of you guys.
Wait. So, some of you in the Tetons, some of you in Moab, some of you in Yellowstone. I cannot wait. It's coming fast. All right, everybody.
You take care.
We'll see you in a month. Bye, guys.